Princess seams are a style line that eliminate the need for a bust and waistline dart. They incorporate the fullness into the seam for a fitted and elegant look. Now, if you've ever had trouble sewing princess seams because you can't quite get the hang of easing in the excess fabric in that curve to create a smooth, flat seam and ended up with more of a homemade look, you're in the right place, my friend. I had that same problem for years until I discovered the secret to sewing princess seams. It's so easy that you'll be able to sit down at your machine and sew perfect princess seams every single time. I'm taking you through the process step by step to show you how to do it, so keep watching. Hi, I'm Tony, and this is So Lounge. Now, the pattern I'm working with is Vogue 9187. This is a vintage Vogue reprint, and I'm going to be making view D, which is the sleeveless version with the slightly scooped neck. I am making it out of this hot pink rayon linen that is made in Italy that I bought at High Fashion when they closed last year. And while I don't usually sew with solid colors, this is something I plan to wear to court, and it will work perfectly with a suit in the summertime and keep me a little bit cooler since it's linen and sleeveless. Now, looking at the instructions for this pattern, initially I thought that it might have the secret in the pattern instructions because I found it in the Vogue sewing book. But no, it does not. The pattern makes the assumption that you already know how to do this. So to get started, I did follow the instructions and I did some stay stitching on the center front piece in these curves and the back piece in the center curve that we're going to attach the side seam to. Now, this is where it gets a little bit more complicated in that there's another step to do. And why this is eliminated is a mystery to me. So this is my center front side panel that is going to be sewn into this main panel. If you look at the instructions, it says once you've done your stay stitching on your main panel, to pin these sides together and then clip the seam, then baste it, and then sew up your seam. Like, that's all there is to it. But we know not everybody can ease in that fabric super easy, like grandma. So what we're gonna do instead is we're gonna put some stay stitching on this side panel in this curve, and then we're gonna do some clipping to then match these two seams together so they fit. Now, I'm gonna be doing stay stitching along this curve so that we can go in and clip it and then match everything up at the notches. To achieve this, I have my seam gauge on a 1/2 inch. I'm doing 1/2 inch seam allowances because I need a little bit more ease in this pattern than the actual measurements on it. And so then what I did was I moved my needle over to the far right so that it's 1/8 of an inch away from where I'm going to sew my seam allowance. So you want to stay stitch inside the seam allowance 1/8 of an inch from wherever you're planning to sew your seam line. So I have my needle moved over. This would be where the 1/2 inch mark is. I have it moved over 1/8 of an inch, and I'm just going to be sewing at my usual stitch length, which is 2.5. I'm just going to repeat the process with the other side panel so that they're both ready to go. So you can see the stay stitching is in place. I'm going just a little bit below this bottom notch. Once we line everything up at the notches, then we will have the stay stitching in place to keep this curve from stretching out. Now that the stay stitching is in on the outside panel as well as the center front panel, we're going to do some clipping. And that means I'm going to be clipping this edge of the center front piece between the notches. And doing that is going to help flatten out that curve so that then once we go and pin everything together, the two will fit. So this is a pretty severe curve. This is not. And by clipping, we're going to make the two work together so that you get a nice smooth seam. Just clip to the stay stitching. You can put in as many clips as you want. I'm kind of doing mine about, let me see what that is, about a 1/2 inch apart. And I am getting very close to that stay stitching, but be careful you don't go through it. I am using thread snips. Okay, so now you can see how that seam is going to open a little bit, and it's going to match up with this curve a lot better. So I'm just going to go in and get everything lined up, match those notches, and then pin everything into place. So you can see once you add in those clips, now that whole seam matches up between the notches and it fits really smoothly and evenly. And that's the goal of this whole process. Now this is going to help ease that fullness into the seam without you actually having to do any easing, which is the best part of this. If you haven't switched your needle back to its original position, do that now. You do not want to be sewing this 1/8 of an inch away from your seam allowance. So I have my machine all set up. I'm going to start stitching, do a quick back stitch, and then I'm just sewing at a 1/2 inch. So the side you're sewing from is going to be the side that has the clips in it, and you want to keep the underside as smooth as possible during this process. Once you've gotten through that curve and gotten that part of the seam all lined up, just line up the rest of your fabric, and let's finish this out. So I have my whole seam sewn in there, and you can see from the front how nice and neat it looks. I have to pull out a little bit of stay stitching, but that's okay. And we're going to head over to the iron to press this and do some additional notching. Once the seam is all sewn into place, the next step, and this is critical, is that you have to get a pressing ham or a towel kind of rolled into the shape, and we need to press open that seam. This is where the notching is going to come in. So as you press open that seam from the underside, you want to make sure that it lies flat on both sides. And to do that, the side that's the side panel will need to be notched a little bit to help that seam relax and lie flat. So you can see how with this part of the seam, it was pretty smooth, so it's just lying flat. But then once we get into the curve, this side that isn't clipped doesn't really want to lie quite as flat. So we're going to notch it out. And when you put in a notch, you want it to be kind of opposite the center of one of the clips. So you don't want to line up your notches with where you've clipped. You want to kind of alternate between them. So on this one, just put in a little notch there. And then you can see now it's starting to lie flat. So I'm just going to do that along the rest of the seam, and that's going to facilitate the pressing process. Okay, so you can see how that is pressed open, and we're just going to go down the rest of the seam until it's all pressed open. Next, we're going to repeat the process on the back. So take note that the curve goes all the way up kind of into like the armhole, and we're going to need to clip from kind of that top edge all the way to the notch. So I have it pinned together, but I am going to be clipping the same way we did from the center back piece. The zipper goes on this side, and then this is the back shoulder area, and we're going to clip all the way down to the notch and then match the two pieces together. Now that my clips are all in place, I'm just going to pin these two seams together, and I'm just going to bend out the center back piece to match the curve of the princess seam. And when I finish, I'm going to stitch it just like we did from the front with the notches on the top side, stitching from the top to the bottom. Now that both of the backs are sewn, we're going to head back to the ironing board, press open those seams, notch the other seam that is not clipped, and then I will continue with the construction process. So you can see the top of the seam, it matches with the arm's eye. It's a nice smooth seam across the bust. It's not lumpy, it's not bumpy. The fabric is eased in perfectly. Same goes for the back. We have a nice smooth contoured seam here in the back from the arm's eye all the way down to this facing piece that is attached on the bottom. It is nice and smooth. It looks good. You can achieve these same results with a few extra steps that will totally make it worth your while. Now, the extra stay stitching in this outside piece of your top to support the princess seams, and then you do a little bit of clipping on this main panel in this curve to be able to match these two perfectly, and you will have great looking princess seams every single time you sit down. Best of all, it's not going to look homemade. There's another great video coming up next. You totally want to check it out, and I'll see you over there.